Hi, hey, this weekend I'm at a Mountain Man Rendezvous, also known as a muzzleloader or black powder shoot. And this is basically a competition where people come with their old muzzleloader rifles, cap and ball guns, their tomahawks, and they come and camp in a primitive style that's very historic. But what's even more fun is they come dressed in period dress. Looks like we've got people here from right out of the Jeremiah Johnson movie or the Pioneer days. And that's why I'm here. I want to meet some people to photograph some portraits that I can then process to look like they're period images with a sepia and hard look to them and stuff like that. So I'm going to wander around, meet some people, do some portraits, and I'll show you what I came up with. So there's lots of things that happen at a Mountain Man Rendezvous, and one is what's called the trail. This is the main reason for the event, which is to shoot their black powder and historic firearms at targets that are placed along a trail. They each have a scorecard, and they record how well their shooting is as they move along the trail, and they do these shooting events several times a day over a multi-day weekend. It's pretty interesting to photograph, and you can get some good shots of the target shooting, but be sure and bring some earplugs. The challenge is to get a variety of interesting shots because you're limited to shooting from the side or from behind the people because of safety issues. In the past, when I shot the magazine story 25 years ago, I set my camera out near a target, and then I fired it remotely to capture the gun blast and smoke as they shot at the target that was near my camera. But today, I'm much more interested in the portraits and the things that I can find at the encampments. One of the challenges today is that the sun is out, so I've decided to put all the people into the shade of these large trees and just photograph them there, and that's to get lower contrast. If you think of many of the historic photographs, they were shot in the shade as well, so I think that's going to work best on a day like today. Okay, the next photograph I'm going to do, I'm going to position the Mountain Man right here in the edge of the shade. And the reason is the light is really contrasty. The wind's blowing, so I can't set up a reflector or anything like that. So what I'm going to do instead, position him right on the edge of the shade, make sure the sun's not dappling down on him and creating hot spots on him to get a little bit of bounce back off the ground. And I'll let the background behind him blow out because I will expose for him in the shade. And that has a pretty good old-time look, you know, with slightly blown out backgrounds and that sort of thing. And I've got Photoshop that I can work on it as well. So that's my plan for this shot. Once I placed this guy in the shade, I dropped my camera angle down to the ground level, and the main reason for doing that is that it visually narrows how much of that shadow around him I'm going to see. The higher the camera angle, the more of that shadow is going to show, and the lower the camera angle, the less that's going to show. And I want that because that allows more of the background behind him to be obvious. The other thing I do is ask him to hold his rifle in different ways, like close to his body, as well as pushed out away from him a ways, and in his arms, just to make sure I get a good variety of poses. And I did that pretty much with all the people. Out of all the images I shot, this is the one that I've settled on right here because it's I like the pose, and as you can see, the background is fairly light and bright, and yet I can still work with that quite well. So now I'm in the forest and actually photographing the Mountain Man, and fortunately a cloud came over the sun and really softened the light, made it quite flat, which is very historic as far as I'm concerned. As they were mentioned previously, they're always looking for flat lights. So here's a couple of the shots, full length and half body shots, and I tried a variety of poses using a 70 to 200 millimeter lens at f2.8 to throw the background out of focus, and I'm quite happy with the variety that I got here. With this couple, who I thought were very photogenic and had a great looking camp, I set them up and added a little bit of flash to start with, but then decided I didn't like the extra light. And I also liked the setup, but she was thinking this was a warm and fuzzy portrait, and she was real clingy and cuddly with her husband there and smiling and all that kind of stuff. So I did have to walk up and ask them to separate and create more of a historic looking, non-emotional pose, which basically meant just stand next to each other and don't smile. And the reason for that is I really do want to create some authentic looking old-time historic photos with the processing and stuff like that. So here's a couple shots of them. My next guy here was a real treat. Every time I've attended one of these events, there's always somebody who looks even more realistic than all the other people combined. And this guy is one of them. I was so excited to run into him. First of all, he's got a big old gray beard, and once you see the pictures here, you're going to understand why. He was just absolutely magical. So what I did is I stood way back, I zoomed in, I moved in close, and he was great. It's almost like he was a model. He moved left, he moved right, he'd hold the gun in different ways. Looking at the camera, it was just magical. And shot again in low light. So I got lucky with this guy. Another thing that can be really fun to photograph is the encampment where they are all camped. While some of those who attend the event bring their RVs, many camp in a very primitive fashion by bringing cabin tents and teepees and then outfitting them with some pretty old and rustic items. Some people even build their own primitive guns, tools, utensils, leather garments, and then they display them around their campsite. So you don't want to miss out on shooting the campsite because it's really a great place to walk around and look at some of the very interesting items that could make some great photographs. The next thing I found really exciting was this beautiful teepee that one of the mountain men had built. He'd made this thing himself, and it was absolutely gorgeous, and I had to photograph it. And then even more, he looked like he was right out of Custer's Black Hills expedition, so I wanted to photograph him and in front of his tent. So as you can see by this picture, I moved him into the sun, and the contrast was horrible because he's wearing a hat, and I thought, you know, it's not going to work to have him into the sun. So what I ended up doing was putting him in the shade like I had done with everybody else, but I didn't want the tent, in this case, to blow out. So what I ended up doing was basically lighting him with a flash. He's really the only guy that I lit that way. And so as you can see by this picture, I also, when I lit him, I overexposed the background on purpose so that I could overexpose the shadows in the foreground, and then light him with the flash, so the lighting coming from the same direction that's hitting the teepee. And then on top of that, I blended the two exposures, the one for the teepee and the one for him in the foreground, into a single picture, and you can see it here. This works a lot better, and once I created my black and white tintype effect, it looked perfect. So the rendezvous wrapped up, and I headed back home with quite a few cards full of images from the event, and quite happy with some of the portraits that I got. And now it was time to get on the computer and see what I could come up with as far as an old-time sepia look. And as you can see with this image here, I created, you know, something to that effect. If you get online and you look up tintype and old times effects, you really come up with a lot of variety of images that photographers did 100 years ago and some that are being done these days. And they really look quite different, so I figured I'd be safe with just creating my own look. And as you can see by this, there's a couple effects going on here. I tried the sepia filter in Photoshop, and I didn't really like that, and messed around with sliders and that sort of thing. And then I ended up opening up Topaz Black and White Effects and going in and choosing a setting that they had that got me close. And it's the Van Dyke Wenge, or W-E-N-G-E. And in quad tone colors, I selected some various ones and slid them around a little bit. And with this effect, I found I wanted to reduce a little bit of the yellow-green with an adjustment layer after I had processed it with this effect. Then I went in and I selected the lens effect, Topaz lens effect, and I blurred the background a little bit more to create even more shallow depth of field. I brightened up the eyes and the pupils just a little bit, and then I did a high pass filter set at 2 to sharpen things up a little bit more. Then I finished up with the Topaz Black and White Effects for the sepia tone, and adjusted the exposure and the color balance a little bit to try to maintain some consistency. Then I finally added a negative effect overlay layer that I found somewhere on the internet was free layers like the old Polaroid film. When you peeled them, you got this gunky black and white negative out of the Polaroid. And so I found some of those on the internet somewhere. And I went ahead and applied those. So you've just seen pretty much everything that I've done on these. Now, not everyone, as I mentioned, had the out of focus background or the negative overlay. There's just some variety here, trying different brown tone sepia effects, but gives you a clear idea of the finished result, like this image, which has the negative to it. The individual portraits had the out of focus background. So there you go. Basically, you've seen what a Mountain Man Rendezvous looks like and how to create some old-time processing. Of course, it's all experimentation, but hopefully someday you can attend a Mountain Man Rendezvous and capture some interesting portraits of some interesting people. Happy shooting!